the pictures. Oh, now, where did this? We had, and actually, I had a really interesting conversation. Cigar night. Pastor Mark from Emmanuel came to Cigar Night, and I like that guy a lot. We were talking about stuff. He uses Septuagint because his, they're the quotes. So we were talking about, Septuagint, some Greek stuff. That's where Concordia Academy is. The stuff, yeah. And
you like Pastor Love.
yeah, he smells and bells kind of guy. I'm a smells and bells kind of person. Anyway,
No one's
I just what's that?
Oh my goodness.
I missed that one.
He smokes a pipe though, and I said, no one's perfect.
I think. Well, I hope he's smoking a cigar and having a good drink. Don't trust anybody that doesn't have obvious bad habits, because they're hiding whatever their bad habits are. Right? That's what you got to worry about. Anyway, we have this Jesus. Jesus. We had this Seder, and I told you it's an Essene Seder, and that's what we were discussing at Cigar Night, because the other Gospels have the Passover meal on their own day, and then Jesus sets up the Eucharist. He sets up the bread and wine, and John does not. And I told you that, and I thought it was also interesting because Pastor Mark, I said, I think John is the most Gentile, most, non-Hebrew of all the Gospels. And he's like, he agreed. And I said, because I think it speaks to the Greeks and the Romans. So I thought it was really interesting. Talk about like-minded. When you find a person who's like-minded, especially about historical stuff, that generally, if you read what I'm not going to pound the seminaries too much, but I really do think that you get into this seminary thinking. Seminary thinking being the idea that we've done it for 2,000 years, and so therefore it's got to be. Well, no, we haven't done it for 2,000 years. We've only not had the Apocrypha in our Bible since 1826, when we magically disappeared it. Things are historical and hysterical. The Turbingen School was probably the greatest destruction of Christianity ever, because at the beginning, and I mentioned this before, I'll mention it again, at the beginning of the archaeological age, when we first invented archaeology around the beginning of the 1800s, they didn't find the evidence they thought they would find immediately for New Testament and Old Testament stuff. And they immediately concluded, oh, it doesn't matter. And the Turbingen School, what they did, and that's a German Lutheran school of theology, which destroyed our theological backgrounds, said, it doesn't matter if there's proof. What matters is faith. You got to have proof. If Jesus did not physically come, physically die, physically be resurrected, and if that didn't happen, as C.S. Lewis writes, as what's his name, my favorite guy, Eminence Manzaverti guy, if that didn't happen, then just forget about it. You're just like every other religion, right? I've told you before, the Hindus, you say, here's the Bible. And I have my Bible on the computer, but you had your Bible, you go, here's the Bible. It's the Word, I believe it. It's like a Hindu person will say the same thing to you. The Zoroastrians will say the same thing to you. The Hindus will say the same thing to you. Here it is. It's the
Mormons.
What's that?
Yeah, the Mormons will say the same.
The Mormons will say the same to you. I've actually done classes, and the freebie fun one of the classes is to always start and prove the veracity of the text. You can't do that with any other, quote, religious text. So you have these proof, and you have the documents. And we have this very interesting thing about John, which is a late date document. And I've told you, I think this is the wonderful thing about John, is the Greeks and the Romans were saying, what else did Jesus do? We want to know more. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are not synoptic, but they're pretty close to one another in lots of ways. John is not considered one of the, quote, synoptic gospels. I do not believe the gospels are synoptic at all. That's silliness. If you try to read them as English documents, they sure look synoptic. And you say, oh, they came from the magic of Q. Everybody knows what Q is? Q is that magic document. The Tübingen School. Tübingen School invented Q because they said, and how many copies of Q are there? Zero. No one's even found a single one. It's just like the Tübingen School said, all the documents started in Aramaic. Had to, because Jesus was stupid and an itinerant and only spoke Aramaic. He might have known a little bit of Hebrew. No, that's crazy. We've never found a source document for any of the New Testament documents in Aramaic. Aramaic pretty much did not exist as a written language. It was written, but it did not exist as written language. The spoken language of the place and times was Koine Greek. Now, I argue that it was really classical Greek wrapped in a Koine wrapper, but that's another thing of how do you interpret words in Greek, especially in the Greek of the time. But that's a whole other argument. The point is this: we do have historical documents. We have wonderful historical documents, even pieces reaching from Matthew back into the first century. If you remember back when we did veracity. And why am I saying this? Because we have the disciples. Our Simeon, the great Simeon of John in this section, was back when they washed the feet. That was not a miracle. It was a sign, but not a miraculous sign. Remember, a Simeon in Greek means a supernatural or ceremonial indication. So it can wrap itself. And I used to talk about this a lot. I haven't talked about it a lot recently. But Greek has both sacred words and not so sacred words. And Simeon is a sacred word in the sense that it is used as part of the religious terminology. And the religious terminology here of the Simeon being not supernatural, it's very ceremonial. Remember, we went through the whole thing about bathing, about how baptism and mikveh and how that all works and fits. And Jesus specifically told them, we are doing a ceremonial ablution when we are washing the feet. And it was something that was rare. It was not rare for you to get your feet washed. Every inn you went to, every house you went to, the kid would come or someone would come, a slave would come, and they would wash your feet. What was astounding was that Jesus, the provider and the head and the lead, would wash the feet. That was unheard of. That was something that peasants might do. But the foot washing, and we don't do foot washing. By the way, I have to throw this out because this is really an important thing. Do you know that one of the main things that the Anglo-Saxon people did? That's us. Most of us are all Anglo-Saxons in our background to some degree. One of the main things the Anglo-Saxons did was foot washing and the bread of peace. If you went to any home, in an Anglo-Saxon home, and by the way, yes, it might be a servant, it might be a slave, a thrall in Anglo-Saxon terms, but it was highly likely that if you were equal guests, that the person washing your feet in an Anglo-Saxon home would be the master of the house or the mistress of the house, most of the master, because they were really separate. And why was that? Because guess what had infiltrated the Anglo-Saxon community? Christianity. Christianity was a very important part of the Anglo-Saxon community. They went from pagan to Christian very quickly. It resonated in their societies, although you don't hear much about this, right? You go from Beowulf, I think Dave was funny, he just read Beowulf. You go from Beowulf, which, by the way, people think was a Christian, what do you call it? It is a saga. It's an Anglo-Saxon saga. But many people think that the Anglo-Saxons actually began using that as a parable for Christianity, which it is. The last part, the add-on part about the dragon, dragons, okay. I know I'm going on about, this is, the whole point of this is the historical point. The point of the dragons is Beowulf. The dragon represents the hidden treasures of the world. What is the hidden treasure of the world? Jesus Christ. The mystery of Christ. Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again. Which is very interesting that we do not include those words in our Eucharist, where almost every other Orthodox and liturgical group does. Just saying, not as a negative, but it's interesting that we've pulled that out, which I think is, I think we should put it back in. But anyway, the whole point being that the background for all this history is they have had a Seder. It looks like the Essene Seder. And then Jesus says at the last, and I got the quote down here. Let's see. Where'd I put that? No, I guess I put it up here, the top. This is what Jesus says at the very end of 14. You rise up, literally rise up in the marketplace. Let us lead from hence on either side, which is a very interesting statement in itself. Let's lead from hence on either side. And there's a question, where is this? Jesus calls for them to rise up in the marketplace and to lead hence on either side. He's making his way towards something. I'm guessing the temple and through the great marketplace. But I have this interesting map. I pulled this map and I kept it, not because it's, I think, super accurate, but because I think it's very interesting. Because it is accurate in some cases, in some ways. Remember I told you Turbingen School, and this is why I was telling you about history. Turbingen School had really caused a lot of the issues we have in problematic issues. And when they started finding all these things, right, we began to build this picture, this more realistic historical picture through archaeology. And the cool thing about archaeology, has archaeology ever contradicted anything we found in the New Testament? No, not at all. In the Old Testament, there are some problematic issues, but a lot of that we believe as historians are archaeological errors or whatever. You know, it took them forever to find Babylon because it says in the Bible, Babylon got washed away. So we were looking for Babylon in a plain. No, it was in a swamp. You looked in a swamp and guess what you found? Babylon. Why? Because the walls are washed away. Because Darius moved the river to wash it away. Isn't that funny? You go look and you find it. Anyway, a lot of this stuff, you know, we are slowly building. Here's some proof text that's obvious. Look what it says here. Here's Herod's fortress, Herod's palace. They say the Praetorium. But if you read my book, Centurion, which is coming out in a revised copy, you know that the Praetorium, where's the Praetorium? Anybody know? Here's the fortress of Antonia. Where did the Romans keep their legion? They actually had two columns of legion, or two cohorts. They did not have a whole legion there. They kept the legions in pieces, parts. I've had to reread my book over and over again, so I'm really familiar now with all the good stuff. when you have to reread it, you study it for years, and then you write it, and then you're like, oh, here it's done. You have to reread it, and you have to go back. But the Romans, why would the Romans put their stuff in the Praetorium? We know that this is where Herod's palace is. They had torn down the walls of Herod's palace years and years ago because, remember, there are 4 Herods, right? There's one Herod, Herod the Great. What happened to him? Well, he died. We think he died of natural causes, whatever, who knows. But he had 4 sons that became the 4 tetrarchs. The 4 tetrarchs of the area, of the Galilee, of Jerusalem, of Perea, and there's another area, I think the Essene lower area. Anyway, the Romans really quickly got rid of 2 of them because they were incompetent fools. And what do the Romans want?
Order.
Money.
Their money. Well, they want order, but the big deal is money. Tribute for Caesar. We call it taxes. It's not. It's tribute for Caesar. So they want that tribute money coming in. And so they have the tribute, and they dumped them. One of the first places they dumped was the richest part of all of Judea. That was Judea, because Judea had lots of money, very valuable. Essenes, the Pharisees, Sadducees, the temple, right? And boy, that temple money, boy, we want some of that temple money. Although Pilate did raid the temple money early, and he built an aqueduct. Oh, terrible thing. But anyway, the Romans very quickly got rid of 3 of Herod's sons. Some of them had accidents. One of them got sent to Gaul. Actually, he got sent to, what's that area, the south part of France?
Riviera?
Basically the Riviera, but the Riviera was part of Gaul, and not a very good place to go, because what did they do to Romans in Gaul? They were fighting battles. They croaked, so you're a dead man. So he didn't last very long there either. The only guy who was left was Herod, I think Antipas. Herod Antipas was the guy who controlled the Galilee, and he was really good. Now, Herod, if you remember, that Herod would come down for the pilgrim festivals, even though Herod was an Essene. All Herod's sons were Essenes, or not Essenes, Edomite. They were Edomites, and they weren't supposed to go to the temple or anything, but they did. And Herod's palace, this was originally the fortress that was built by Herod the Great. And Herod the Great did not like Jerusalem because they had problems. And the Romans were really smart. After Herod the Great croaked and after they took back over Jerusalem, they tore down the walls. The Praetorium was not here. The Praetorium was up in the Temple of Antonia, where they could overlook. Because look, in a military situation, do you separate your troops? Nah. And we know that Herod or Pilate sent Jesus to Herod. Now, how did he do that? Because Herod was in Jerusalem at the palace. The reason they let him use the palace is because they could keep an eye on them. They could look down to keep an eye on Herod and his troops. And by the way, they did allow Herod's troops to be armed, which was an oddity. And see this? This is wrong. Jesus' trial before Pilate, Jesus mocked by the soldiers. No, it wasn't. That was up in Antonia, because the pavement and the Praetorium is up in the temple near the temple of the fortress of Antonia. Yes, sir.
So I always get my Herods mixed up. First of all, which Herod built the temple, and then which Herod destroyed the records?
The Herod that destroyed the records was Herod the Great. And Herod the Great is also the one who rebuilt the temple. Herod the Great had 4 sons who became the 4 tetrarchs. And I don't have all my notes here, but the names. When I've taught this, right, we've done this. They're forgettable. But you got Herod Antipas, Herod something or other. 2 of them had Herod names, and 2 of them had Greekish names.
Like George Floyd.
Yeah, like
George Foreman.
George Foreman. Yeah. Forgettable. Anyway, they're like Muhammad. Well, it's kind of like, Judah, right? And by the way, Jesus. Everybody was named Jesus in this era. You know Barabbas, right? He's called Jesus Barabbas. His name was Jesus. However, Josh was the same as Jesus. We fix it. We don't want Joshua and Jesus to be confused, right? So if it's the Old Testament, we'll say Joshua. But if it's the New Testament, we'll say Jesus. Unless it's the same as Jesus, then we'll say Joshua. Woo-hoo. It's really cute how we do that. Anyways, here's the thing, Jesus was the high priest. Now, look what they say here. Essene quarter. It can't be the Essene quarter. It's impossible. The Essenes did not live in Jerusalem. You know how we know that? Josephus tells us some really interesting information about Essenes. Essenes did not use the bathroom in sight of Jerusalem. Now, this is what Josephus wrote. We don't know if they went number one. We know they did not go number two within the view of Jerusalem. So every night you have the Essenes that are in Jerusalem running, I guess, going quickly to get to the place where they could do their business. But literally, there cannot be an Essene quarter, because who did have a quarter down here? And if you read a book, there is a market down here. The Pharisaic market was down here. The Sadducees, the main market for that town, for Jerusalem, called the main marketplace, was right here. They call it the second quarter. The Warren's Gate. You notice, here's where all the business, the Anatolian fortress with all the Romans and all the guys and the Greeks were in here. And how do we know? Well, when they crucified Christ, they took him to the most populous part of the city, through the temple. And look, here's the Temple Mount. And if you look at the gates for the temple, the main gate, Sheep Gate, Warren's Gate, whatever, it's not called the Warren's Gate. I don't know what they call it. It's not the Golden Gate. That's the Fish Gate, South Gate. There's names for all the gates. Now, there's a reason why I put this non-correct chart. The chart is correct, generally, but I want to show you because this is supposed to be traditional. The Last Supper, you see, they want to put the upper room here in the southern part, which, and that's not, it's a refuse gate. The water gate's correct, yeah, refuse gate. They call this the Essene Gate. Really makes you wonder who made this map and who developed it, because Essenes were wiped out in Messina, about, what is that, 125 AD or so. Remember that at Medina, they got wiped out. That was pretty much the end of the Essenes as a major group when they tried to revolt. But yeah, you wouldn't call them the Essene quarter. The big quarter was Pharisees. The Sadducees were mostly up to the north in the main thing. And see, this is interesting. Herod Antipas's palace. Now, Herod always kept his Antipas was not allowed a palace separate. So anyway, my point is this. The reason I want to show you this chart is to show you traditionally. So if you go to Jerusalem, they might take you to these places, but the other ones have been done over. Where was Jesus' Last Supper? Well, it's an interesting question. I'm suspecting that the Last Supper was done in the foreign quarter, the main quarter, where the main marketplace was. And so I'm guessing it's probably in this area here. And that's really close to the temple, the Fortress of San Antonio. So now it is possible that it could have been down in the southern part of the city. You know, when Jesus says, you know, this isn't a huge area. So when Jesus says, let's rise up in the marketplace and go together, then they're going, right? Maybe they're going up to the marketplace. They definitely would not be going to the Pharisaic market. Why? Them Pharisees ain't going to let you buy nothing. What kind of money is a Pharisee? This is really an interesting thing. Remember, you got temple money, right? And you got the Greek money. The Romans, and you got Roman money. There's three currencies. The Romans' money was valuable, but only when you turned it into, well, and I left off one. You have Jerusalem money, cordantes, lepton. You guys are lepton, right? The widow's mite and cordantes. They were copper and we think maybe iron pieces of money. They were really low value money. You had the Greek money. What's the famous? The denarii. Yeah. Yeah. The
days wages one? Or?
Yeah, days of wages is the denarius. Yeah, denarius. You had a day's wages is silver, a little silver. But it's very valuable compared to cordantes or lepton. People were buying the bread with lepton or cordantes. Then you had the Roman money. The problem with the Roman money, they had all the kind of money, but who's taking Roman money in Jerusalem? What money did they use? What was the common money they used? They used the money, the lepton and the cordantes, because that's what people had. The Greeks had brought in the denarii, and they had their, their smaller funds there too. You look back in the Centurion, I've got the list of all that, how much they're worth compared to each other. But the big deal was transferring the money. The temple had its money. So if you were a person, buying a Passover lamb, you had to go to the temple, convert your money into temple money, and then that money was, you were able to buy a lamb with it. You think you got cheated at the temple? Oh man, yeah, we know. That's why Jesus went in, and 3 times we know at least. What did he do?
Drove out the money changers.
Yeah, he drove out the money changers. He kicked out the Passover lamb because, remember I told you, what was Bethlehem famous for?
Lambs.
The lambs. The only thing that Bethlehem did that was important in the whole scheme of the world was they were where the lambs were kept for the slaughter of Passover. Gee, where was Jesus born? Bethlehem. When the lambs were being kept in for the what? For the Passover slaughter. Jesus was born at Passover, during Passover. How do we know? Because that's the only time there are shepherds in Bethlehem, historically. So all this, it all fits. And the reason I'm trying to show you this is because, okay, maybe the Last Supper was here. Caiaphas, there's no way Caiaphas would live in the Essene quarter. There's no way that high priest would be in the Essene quarter. I'm trying to point out to you that if you pull these maps up, it's really interesting stuff, but it may or may not be exactly correct. And how do you know what's exactly correct? Well, it's kind of a question of study. But what was important that I want you to see is this size of the place and where Jesus might be going. He ends up going a lot of the places during the crucifixion sequence. But the most important thing I want you to note is Jesus says, let's rise up and let's go out. And that's where he's giving this amazing, and what I called it, see, I put on your sheet. What they say is this is the vine and the branches, right? The vine and the branches. No, these are warnings to the disciples. Okay, what do we have at the beginning? We had Jesus saying, wash each other's feet. If you don't, you're not my disciples. You're not showing love, la, la, la. Do what I told you to do. That was a semeon. Then you have this dialogue, a dialogue about how you can love. And then we get the question of Judas Iscariot. Judas Iscariot is pointed out, and Jesus sends Judas Iscariot out to do his work, which is turning over Jesus. And he sends him into the marketplace. The disciples think that Judas Iscariot is being sent to get food, get more food, some snacks for the Super Bowl. I don't know. And so he leaves, and we get that dialogue, that long dialogue we had in 14. The dialogue that basically is very, I would say it should have been comforting. It should have been very positive for the disciples. And then suddenly we get this. And this is not comforting at all. Here's the NIV. I am the true vine and my Father is the gardener. There's the Greek. Here's the King James. I am the true vine, my Father is the husbandman. Ego eimi. Whoa. Anytime you see ego eimi, that's a direct identification, concrete identification in Greek. I am the ampellos, the not false. It doesn't say the true vine. It is not an adjective. An adjective. It's not explaining. This is not an adjective. It is saying, I am the vine and I am the not false. This is important because remember when we went over chapter 14, Jesus has said this before. He has said, I am the not false. And then he equated the not false to both God and to the Holy Spirit. That was the huge deal, I think, in 14. One of the huge unstated teluses, right? He goes, not false. And the Father of me, the land worker, literal land worker, farmer, is. I'm the vine, the not false, and my Father is the land worker. Okay. This is already a very negative, and I've got some words here. I don't know if it's important to expand this, but here's the word vine, the base of ampheteros and halon, a vine as in coiling about a support. So Jesus is the vine coiling about the support and the truth, the not false. The picture is important. As we note, we've noted before, the Greek is very concrete. And, to a Greek person, for Jesus to say, I am the vine, is already doing what? Well, it's crazy talk. How can you be a vine? You're a man, right? And I'm saying, I'm the vine. This is just like when he said, I'm the gate. Well, okay. Well, we know how a man can be a gate because, the gate, the shepherd stands in the sheepfold, right at the front, and acts as a gate for the sheep. Okay, I can see that, but that's not what Jesus said here. He said something crazy in Greek. This is as crazy. Well, it's even crazier than Jesus saying, love each other like the gods. Well, if I'm gonna do that, I gotta be a God. But you're hagios, the sacred. Wow, this is really big stuff. And in Greek, it's huge. It starts it with this. I am a vine, the vine, not just a vine, the vine. Meaning something. And here's the farmer from Gay and the base of Ergon. Gergon, a husbandman, a farmer, a land worker. Why is this important? Because here, look at what it says. I mean, even in English, we're starting to get some real negativity. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. Well, every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, so it'll be ever more fruitful. Man, before, Jesus was saying all kinds of really cool, nice stuff, right? Love like the gods. I'll hold you forever. I have a place for you. Where I go, you go. On and on and on and on. It's all kinds of really good talk. And now all of a sudden, bang! I'm not sure why the NIV decides to put their little thing and said, this is about the vine of the branches. Because this isn't vine of the branches. This is a total warning to the disciples. Huge warning. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away. And every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. This is not happy. Look at what it says in Greek. All the whole, a broken off limb or shoot in to me. Now, this is a little different than the translation we get. Not at least bearing or carrying fruit, he raises it and pen the whole. The fruit bearing or carrying, he makes clean by purging, removing undesirable elements. Hence, purged or pruned, eliminating what is fruitless by purifying it. In order that fruit more in quality, and we were talking before about, Greek, English has all kinds of best, better, comparatives. Yeah, the comparatives in English and in other languages. If you study, German has great comparatives. Latin has some real strong comparatives. Greek does not. Here's our comparative that means more in quantity. Plenona, more in quantity, number of quality, the major portion. It means the major portion. So again, it's using a concrete term to give you a comparative, which is really odd. May bear or carry. Let's see what the total translation here is. Now look what it says. Every broken off limb into me, not bearing fruit, he raises up, and all the fruit bearing he makes clean by purging, in order that fruit more in quantity it may bear. So this does not say at all what our NIV or our King James says. It says, every branch in me that beareth not fruit, he taketh away. That's not what it says. Every broken off limb into me, not bearing fruit, he raised up. Okay. In other words, if you're already broken off, the implication here is, if you're already broken off, you might bear fruit. Remember what Jesus told the disciples? Hey, the disciples said, tattled on that guy. Said, it's like your kids. Hey, they're baptizing in your name. They're kicking out demons in your name. And what did Jesus say? Good. Enemy. Do it, right?
I can't do it if I'm not in it.
Yeah, do it. So there is an implication here that it's possible for a broken off limb, not into Jesus, to bear fruit. That's an interesting thing. That doesn't mean that you cannot be part of Jesus and bear fruit. Remember, this is Greek. The Greek is really concrete. We could be considered broken off branches. Why?
Not a little strange from
What's that?
We were all estranged from God to start out.
Yeah, I think it's even simpler than that.
We're not Hebrew people.
Yeah, we're not Hebrews. Right? If you're Hebrew and, okay, the branch that he's talking about, the vine, what does every Hebrew person say when Jesus says, I am the vine? They know that euphemistically. What do they know it is? The branch of Jesse, right? So if you are also part of the branch of Jesse, right, of David's line, of the Hebrew people, oh, you can be a member of the Hebrew people and not be part of the lineage of David, of Jesse's branch, right? So you could be a broken off branch even if you're Hebrew. But even more important, why is this important? It's important to the Romans and the Greeks because they're definitely not Hebrew. They are like broken off branches. So the broken off branches might bear fruit, but if they don't, he raises it up, and all the fruit bearing he makes clean by purging. So whether you're broken off, you're part or connected to Jesus directly, that God is gonna purge you. This is a direct message to the Romans and Greeks and also to the Hebrews. The purge. This is not a happy thing at all. And he's the husbandman. He's the farmer. Look, I don't know if you guys have ever been farmers. My family was always farmers, and my dad did everything he could to get off the farm. Man, he wanted to get off the farm so bad. But because he had to work,
Really?
80 hours, he was a kid loading cotton, picking cotton as a kid with one of those big old cotton sacks. And he said, I hated it. I want to be an aviator because they would make me work less. That's the thing about people who work like on a farm. They work really hard. And then when you put them in like an airplane, they still work really hard. And you go, why are you working so hard? You mean this isn't normal? Right? So anyway, yeah, the farm stuff, I'm just saying, anybody seen a farmer? Okay, anybody seen anybody prune plants? Okay, if you're a gardener, Tammy's like a master gardener lady, so she'll prune plants.
No, I do not.
And she talks to her plants to make sure they're happy. What does a farmer do when he's pruning 1,000, his acreage of like apple trees?
He's got a machine today.
Well, he's got a machine to do it, but he's in there like whack, 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 right? It's like, oh, wrong one. Oh, that's okay. Where Tammy's going to treat them with gentleness and ease, right? It's the same way that you do with kittens. What's a farmer doing? Get out of the milk, right?
Yeah.
It throws the kitten halfway across the barn. The kitten lands on. That's why cats land on their feet because they've been thrown for their whole lives. But what do? We go, oh, little kitty, and then the cat's back in the milk. So I'm just saying that farmers, our picture of farmers should be, the big burly guy, and he's going to take care of stuff, right? You don't want to be pruned if you can help it by the Almighty God, because He's going to make sure that you are properly pruned. And the words are really beautiful. In English, cathario. Everybody know what catharsis is, right? Catharsis literally means to vomit. In Greek, a catharsis. Now, you can have a mental catharsis. You can have a mouth-wise catharsis. You can have, a body catharsis. These are sometimes not positive, sometimes very positive. The reason this is important, and I believe all of our Greek people, including Jesus and the others, everyone who was literate knew this, about the great Aristotle and great Plato and Socrates. And Aristotle wrote about a catharsis of the mind. He said that creativity came from a catharsis of the mind. In other words, filling your brain with good stuff and then literally vomiting it out in writing or in lecture, in talk, in a positive way. And so, well, it disappeared on me, huh? Anyway, this is a very important term in Greek. Wait, wake up. My computer's not working. You think touching it? Come back.
Don't break
Ah.
it.
All right.
Does it allow you to move it right on
Don't
the
kick us
screen?
out for sure. Break it.
Yeah, break it. The catharsis, and the primary point are much more than meets the eye. The use of the word cathario is unusual in this context. It's unusual because it is a philosophical term. It's the same word that Aristotle used in relation to creativity, the catharsis of the mind. That's the English version. This in itself should drive the point of the statement by Christ in the point he intended. This is not about simple pruning, but about changing minds through catharsis. I put creativity through catharsis, through talking, through telling. This statement is also about those who do not bear fruit. It's very interesting in the use of the term aria, to rise up, to raise up. In other words, raise up the pieces, the thing. He said this, okay, look at this. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. I really think this is an important point. Now you're clean through the word which I've spoken to you. Okay, it's not just the word. Let's see what he says. Even now you made clean by purging. Made clean by purging. In other words, through the mind, through understanding, through the knowledge. Eliminating what's fruitless. You are, through a logical argument, that which I utter to you. Even now you are made clean by purging. Through the logical argument which I uttered to you. What was the logical argument he uttered to them? You remember it was what? Chapter 14 and chapter 13. How did we purge them? What was the semeion that started this whole thing? If I wash your feet, right? Now you are priests. And remember what Simon Peter said? You're not going to wash my feet. You wash my feet. You ain't
And
going
then
to wash
wash all of me.
Huh?
And then wash all of me.
Well, they said, if I don't wash your feet, you are not purged. This is the second part of that. You're not purged. You're not pruned. You're not risen up. You're not ready to go. And so what did Simon Peter go? Then wash me, all of me. Wash me, give me a wash all over. You know, he's ripping off his clothes, you know? Like Jesus, throw that dirty basin on me, right? And Jesus said, if you've already had a Greek bath, you're already clean. But what I do by washing your feet and you washing each other's feet does what? It's what purges you. It's what it's this purifying. And it's okay, remember the whole time Jesus is saying, I'm God. Well, okay, we want to separate God into this God being and Jesus into this Jesus being. But what did Jesus just spend like 2 chapters telling us? 3 chapters, 4 chapters, 13 chapters. I'm God. So the vine is the same as the one purging the vine. The same one being the husband to the vine. And even more than that, what does the vine produce? Now, we didn't get this because it's not in the Eucharistic point in John. But what does every Greek guy and gal and everyone hearing this, when Jesus says, I am the vine, what does that presume? It's grapes. And what do you make with grapes?
What?
Why? And I don't care what they say, The minute you squish wine, you got new wine, because the minute you squish wine, there's this yeast on the grapes. This is a great invention of Welch's. What did Welch's invent?
Pasteurization?
Pasteurization of grape juice, because the minute you squish grape juice, you get this yeast that goes into the grapes and it creates new vine. In other words, the alcohol begins the minute you squish the grapes. And so people said, you can't feed that to kids, and they did anyway for years. They said, you can't feed that to kids, but they did. Welch just said, man, we don't want to have any of the alcohol in that. So he invented a method of pasteurizing grape juice. Welch's grape juice is Welch's grape juice because it's pasteurized. If you get some yeast to throw in there, you might make something. I don't know. The pasteurization is supposed to kill the yeast. I worry about that. Anyway.
Sure.
It may be a little bit off track, but I have a question about when he's saying he's divine and he's using the AOA form. It's common for like other Protestants who don't believe that the Eucharist is the true body and blood of Christ to say that was just a metaphor, because he also said things like, I am the vine, but he wasn't literally a green plant, or, you know, I am this or that were metaphors. So they're saying, well, that was just a metaphor like all these other things.
Well,
So what's the difference?
the Greeks would agree with you. But the Greeks would also say this is obviously an irony. Right? The Greeks, our problem is we are euphemistic. You can be as euphemistic as ever, but what will your kids miss every time? Irony and satire. A kid who has not been taught irony and satire will never get it. That's why I think 90%, well, not 90, that's why 45% of the people in our country are whack jobs, because they don't understand irony and satire. They don't understand jokes. You know how you got whole generations who don't understand jokes anymore? You don't want to take umbrage. Oh, you said something bad. Oh, you said something naughty about someone. Well, it's a joke, for goodness sake. Figure it out. If you don't learn irony and satire, I think you've missed the whole point of culture. And I think that what this points out in the Greek, remember the Greeks are into total concreteness. So, yes, it's impossible for Jesus to be the vine. But it's an irony. And the beauty of this irony is because with the vine, you have the fruit. And if you remember in Greek, the word for grape juice can also be used, ironically, for blood. So there is the word hemo for blood, and then there is the word for grape juice. I don't remember it right offhand. But the Greeks do not use the terms euphemistically, but they might use the term in the sense of describing a battlefield covered with the juice of the vine. Yes, sir.
I was just kind of thinking a little deeper level as an artist, if you want to explain to something an image, a concept they don't relate to, you draw a picture of that concept so that they can see it and relate to it. Well, now Jesus is the creator of the universe. So in essence, he's the real vine, and the vines we see growing in the fields are the illustration of what he is.
Ooh, I like that.
In 3 dimensions and living vines.
I don't disagree with that at all. I think that is a very good, we do this correctly, I believe, if we are careful. If we're not careful, we get whack job stuff going on. But the careful being, what we do are symbols of the holy, of the real, right? In heaven, do they carry banners? Who knows? But we know there are huge banners with like thousands of angels on them, right? Or whatever. Maybe they're plastic screens. Maybe they're computer screens. Maybe, who knows what God has set up, right? But yet, if we carry a banner, we are representing with that banner holy things. We are decorating our church. And Pat does that every year for us. Thank you, Pat, for decorating. But he gets the troops and they decorate our church. Now, is the holy temple of God decorated with holly? Well, I don't know. But you know what? We try to make our place, our sanctuary, our holy place, like we think God should be. Now, it's always going to be a pale comparison, right? So I think what you said is correct. Jesus is the true vine, right? Oh, the not false.
Well, that's like what you were saying way back when, earlier in John, when we were talking about the message being that the spiritual things are actually more real than the real, what we think is real in the physical world.
Yes, I agree. And this, I think the Greeks would get this. The Greeks at the same time would be shocked, right? Ego in the vine. Wait, I got to think about this. But that's what Jesus wants them to do, right?
And why don't we do that all through our church? It's all through our worship and everything. They're physical representations of spiritual truths.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to express.
The tabernacle and the temple themselves, God said, these are just like a reflection of what's in heaven.
Bingo. You remember back to Hebrews, or you're just pulling it. When we looked at Hebrews, this was one of the big points that it talks about, right? Whole chapter of the tabernacle versus that part of God outside of the creation, right? That it represents it, that it's a reflection of it, right? Yeah, this stuff is really beautiful. Even now you are made clean by purging undesirable elements through the logical armor which I utter to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. That's what it says here. This is really interesting. Abide in me. I use the branch cannot bear fruit of itself except to abide in the vine. No more can ye except you abide in me. Let's see what it says in Greek. You stay in me and I in you. Kathos, just according to the broken off limb or shoot. No or not, he is powerful, a fruit to bear or carry from or away from itself, in case that me, not least, it stays into the emploi to a vine in this manner. Not, however, you, in case that me, not at least, into me, you say, okay, we got to obviously turn this into English. You stay into me, and I into you. Just as in the broken off limb or shoot is not powerful, a fruit to bear from itself, in case that if it does not stay into the vine in this manner, not, however, you, in case that into me, you do not stay. All right. Now, the point of this, we're running out of time. The point of this is there are broken off branches from the vine of Jesse. There are Jews who are not connected to Christ. However, Jesus is giving us an irony. Just like he said, if you don't love like the gods, you have no place with me. And all the Greeks and all the Hebrews and all the disciples go, well, that means we don't have a place with you. Right? Well, we know there are those that are not connected directly to Christ. In other words, us Gentiles, we're not Hebrew, we don't have the Hebrew basis. We're not, from the stone of Jesse, we're not from the lineage of David. So we're not really part of that vine. But yet, how can we be part of the vine?
He raises us up.
He raises us up and purges us. And if we're following the logical argument, because what he's pointing to is the mind. He's pointing to, it's not all about the body, and especially in the Greek sense here. It's about the mind and the Holy Spirit. It's about the pneuma. And so, this is a message that Paul resoundingly puts in the New Testament. It's I can't do physically that which I want to do, says Paul. How can I be like Christ? How can I love like the gods? How can I aim for the mark? It is through the mind. It is through the logos, the logical argument of Christ. Now, he does give us some other stuff, which I think is important. The washing of the feet. That's all here. And I think the Eucharist is being pointed at. We're going to see more and more how that is because we're talking more about the vine itself. But the vine here obviously represents the Eucharist. So we'll see. We'll look into this more. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look at us this week in your name. Pray. Amen.
Tuesday one. Come on, it's yours, your next.